Hi, everybody. Welcome to Concept 3.4 Long Run Aggregate Supply. So, up to this point, we talked about the short run. We talked about how when price levels rise in the short run, businesses raise their prices, but the amount of wage that they pay their employees and other resource prices are fixed. So, we have flexible output prices, we have fixed input prices. The difference between what I charge people, what I pay in order to produce it, those are my profits. So initially, when price levels rise in the short run, profits are there, right? And so businesses respond to those profits by increasing production. That's why average supply is upward sloping. However, in the long run, of course, those input prices become flexible. I renegotiate wages. And so if I've been overworking my employees, they're going to ask for a raise. Or if inflation's been kicking in, they're going to ask for a raise. And vice versa. If I'm in a recession, my employees are going to accept a lower wage because I can't afford to keep them on in that capacity. So that's the difference between long run and short run. In the short run, input prices are fixed, output prices are flexible, which creates temporary profits for businesses in the short run. In the long run, those input prices become flexible. And there's no real timeline for this. So there's no like, hey, long run is a year out. It just depends on the businesses. It's conceptual, right? The timeline is when do input prices become flexible? So this is the long run aggregate supply. Here's what you need to know. Long run aggregate supply looks like this. Price level will continue to increase in the long run, which we know, right? Prices rise, but GDP is going to remain fixed at one point because in the long run, incentives are in place for us to produce at full employment GDP. Sure, we'll temporarily produce too much, right? Because businesses will see those increase in prices as profit and they'll produce more. But in the long run, those wages will go up and they'll go back to full employment GDP. And sure, temporarily we'll fall into a recession, right? And we'll decrease employment and things can be pretty bad. But in the long run, those wages and prices of the inputs will go down, indicating more profitability for businesses, and they'll go back to full employment GDP. So I like to think of long run average supply as sort of this beacon, right? It's the full employment trend line. Think of it as like a lighthouse. This is where we want to be. We didn't even get a pen here. We always want to be at long run aggregate supply. And so what we normally use this for is just a goal, right? We show it on the ADAS model. So we have our average demand, average supply, but we add long run aggregate supply and it indicates full employment. This is where we want to be. In the long run, we will always produce full employment GDP. The incentives are in place. We will do it. However, we don't live in the long run. We live in the short run. So we experience the recessions. We experience the inflationary gaps. But this is why the business cycle exists. It will always draw us back to full employment. Inflationary gap, sure, but back to full employment eventually. Recessionary gap, yes, but back to full employment eventually. So that's what long run aggregate supply indicates. It's perfectly vertical at full employment GDP. So this QY here is always going to be your full employment. Also, at this point, we'll have the natural rate of unemployment, which is full employment of 4 to 5% every single time. That's the key. You need to know that about long run aggregate supply in order to answer just about any question on the ADAS model. All right, let's keep going. Get this out of the way. Okay, so what shifts aggregate supply or long run aggregate supply? Can it shift? The answer is yes. Anything that shifts our potential GDP or our full employment. What do I mean by that? Well, we know these already. We know that anything that creates economic growth is going to result in an outward shift in our production possibilities curve, which means that we, in full employment level, can produce more. That same thing applies to long run aggregate supply, right? So any permanent change in our production possibilities curve, which is an increase in quantity or quality of resources, a change in technology or productivity, is going to result in a shift in long run aggregate supply in the same direction. That's what that says here. Let me give you that. There you go. A permanent change in the production possibilities curve of the economy can shift LRAS. So shifting long run aggregate supply to the right indicates what? economic growth. This is the same as a production possibilities curve shifting outward. So this might be because of new technology or new productivity or an increase in the quantity or quality of resources. It is also possible, less likely, but also possible for long run aggregate supply to shift to the left. That is anything that devastates our economy. A decrease in the quantity or quality of a resource is normally what happens here, caused by, generally speaking, warfare or natural disasters, is when that's going to occur. But long run average supply shifting right or left is the same as increase in economic growth or the shrinkage in our economy. It goes hand in hand with the production possibilities curve. So keep that in mind. Okay, so here you go. Here are your shifters, the same as the shifters of PPC. If you're a person who likes to write these down, get my face out of the way here. Changing the resource quantity or quality, making us more productive at every single level, increasing overall full employment GDP, shifting outward that production possibilities curve. Any change in technology will also do that same thing. Change in technology, oftentimes they also call it change in productivity. Samesies. Okay? Those are things that can cause LRAS to shift, which is changing our lighthouse, right? Saying, hey, our goal is no longer here. Our goal is out here now. This is our potential GDP. This is what we have the capacity to produce. Excuse me. So it looks like this. When we have long run average supply shift to the right, economic growth, it is the same as when production possibility curve shifts outward, right? Economic growth. Otherwise, normally, unless we're shifting this curve, which happens rarely, but we'll talk about it, long run average supply stands as a beacon of where we want to be. If ADAS is too far to the right of that, then we have a gap. We have an inflationary gap. We're producing too much, and we're probably going to have demand pull inflation. And if GDP, aggregate demand, aggregate supply intersect to the left of that, we're going to have a recession. We're producing too little. So it stands as a lighthouse, as a beacon of where we want to be. And I'll show you that here in a minute. All right, that's it. 3.4 long run average supply. Know that it is an indicator of full employment GDP in the long run. Our input and output prices are flexible as opposed to the short run where only the output prices are flexible, which means that we will always go back to full employment GDP. Know that it's a vertical line because price level can go up and down in the long run, but GDP will be fixed at full employment. And then finally, know the shifters. Know a change in the quantity or quality of resources and a change in technology will cause it. Khan Academy is ready for you. Thanks so much. Until next time.